Chapter 27. For Aarti, Facebook was a tool to make ex-boyfriends jealous. After all, isn't that what everyone did? Women she knew kept changing their profile photo to show how hot they had become and what their exes were missing. They tagged themselves in photos taken at parties to prove they had a more interesting social life than that loser they had once been with. Facebook was also the space to send messages to each other that no one else could see. With her mobile phone, Aarti's messages might be read by someone else, including her husband, and lead to suspicions. Facebook was a safe space, and it was exactly how Dhruv connected with Aarti after they drifted apart. Dhruv was careful enough not to like anything she posted, but he did stalk her page. Finally, he got the courage to send her a private message, asking her if she wanted to meet up. Aarti was hesitant and replied that she didn't have time, too busy that she was raising a child. But soon, she started responding. If she posted a photo of herself with friends, he would ask her how the party was. She would tell him and even include little details. It wasn't as if she couldn't tell Amitabh these things. It was rather that Dhruv always seemed to be the first to comment, wanting to know more. Amitabh would ask general questions about where she was going, when she would be back, and whether she needed the driver. He would forget to ask her how her day was, and when she reminded him, he would say, "Sure, tell me about it." Lately, he seemed even more disinterested in her life. Dhruv, however, had been present continuously. She was the one who had chosen to ignore him, but now she was speaking to him regularly. He would even appear jealous if she had her arms around a man in a photo. He would send her love emoticons when she wore a pretty dress. He noticed. He admired. He commented. What more did a woman want? So when Aarti picked up the phone and asked to meet him, he was thrilled and eager. Dhruv offered to pick Aarti up and she agreed. For the remainder of the week, Aarti wondered if she should tell Amitabh. Would he be offended? Would he reprimand her? Would he stop her from going? She thought it was best to be honest. Her husband had to know about her life and she couldn't lie. She'd done it once and had lived with the secret for 7 years. She didn't want to tell more lies. On Friday morning, as Amitabh was leaving for work, Aarti said she needed to talk to him. They were alone, as Aryan had already left for school and her in-laws were in their own house. I'm going out with Dhruv for dinner, Aarti said. Amitabh was surprised. I didn't know you were in touch with him. Aarti shrugged. We just connected recently on Facebook. She didn't lie. She just did not reveal any more details than necessary. He picked up the car keys. Sure, I'll be back by 7:30 tonight. You can leave Aryan with Mom and Dad if you're leaving before that. He stepped out of the house and left the topic at that. He's not jealous? Aarti wondered. Either he had no bone of jealousy in him, or he was extremely sure his wife wouldn't stray. Now Aarti felt bothered that he wasn't bothered. She decided to have a fantastic time with Dhruv. She needed to go out, seek an outlet for her frustrations. She would go with the flow. Dhruv picked her up on time. As they drove to their destination, they complained about the potholes, made small talk about his work as a sports coach in a college and hers as a sales agent who traveled a lot, and spoke about common friends too. They successfully avoided the subject of their meeting 7 years ago, bumping into each other at an airport, both frustrated with delayed flights, checking into a hotel, making love through the night, and leaving for their respective homes without having breakfast. It was a night that left them both so ridden with guilt that they chose not to keep in touch after that. And while Dhruv had desperately wanted to reconnect, as his marriage began turning sour, he knew that Aarti would shut him down because she had a baby to look after and a loving husband who she had chosen to spend the rest of her life with. And tonight, they sat opposite each other in this newly opened restaurant called Jelly Place in a small suburb close to Aarti's place. Try the pasta, Aarti said, as she gave him a spoon of her fettuccine. With 3 glasses of wine down and halfway through their meal, Aarti was feeling more relaxed. They spoke of old times and ribbed each other as if they were nothing but long-lost friends. Aarti felt completely comfortable, and so did he. He admired her body, not missing her cleavage, which she had carefully bronzed for the occasion. She was stunning in a button-down red top with a short and tight silver skirt and sky-high silver stilettos. Her dark wavy hair cascaded down her back and shimmered in the light as she tossed her hair back to clip it. He longed to touch her, but he knew that if he made a move, he might lose her forever. They had just started becoming friends, and it would be a long time before she trusted him again. But once she gave him a naughty signal with her toes gently caressing his shin, he was most interested in reliving what they had 7 years ago. They were having such a great time that he tried his luck. Halfway through dinner, he held up 2 fingers at Aarti and smiled. What? She didn't understand the sign. He looked around before leaning in and whispering to her, 2 buttons. Aarti was still confused. Take off 2 of your blouse buttons, he said. Undo 1 after the waiter asks you for your dessert, and 1 more when he brings it. He'll see just a little. I'll enjoy watching him squirm. You want to play? Aarti thought. Sure. She nodded naughtily to Dhruv. Soon the waiter came and she seductively opened her topmost button while asking, Is the tiramisu any good? We'll have 1 of that, please. Dhruv watched as she looked into the waiter's eyes as she passed the menu back to him, letting it brush against her cleavage. Dhruv's breath raced faster. She bent forward to reach for her glass of water, carelessly spilling a few drops on her exposed bosom. The waiter was quickly back by then. Aarti unclasped another button and exposed a hint of her plump breasts and her lacy black bra. The waiter clenched his jaw and looked towards the light above to avoid seeing more. Dhruv immediately got a hard-on, which he covered with a napkin over his pants. Aarti took a spoon and leaned over to scoop up a bite of the tiramisu and licked it slowly. Yum, she whispered, closing her eyes, acting out some erotic scene for Dhruv's sake. She could tell how aroused Dhruv was, and her heart hammered in her ear. This was fun. She had never done this with her husband. She felt like a woman on the edge of something extraordinary. She cleared her throat, pretending not to be affected, as he summoned a waiter and asked for the coffee menu. As the waiter stood next to them and Dhruv poured over the menu, Aarti took off her right shoe and slowly moved her toes up his leg. It was with immense control that Dhruv didn't cry out in sheer pleasure as Aarti's toes inched farther and farther up his thigh. And that was how they played out the entire dinner. Aarti had never felt more alive. It was way past midnight when they finished their meal. He called for the check. She offered to pay, but he ribbed her about being a working woman who wanted to prove she was independent. She laughed, mindful of his chivalry. Amitabh cared for her deeply, but he didn't desire her. Unfortunately, sometimes the only man a woman wants is the one who doesn't even know she exists. That's why the attention from Dhruv felt sinfully good. Let me drop you home, Dhruv said as they walked out of the restaurant. Should we take a cab? Aarti asked, to be on the safe side as soon as the valet brought his car. He shook his head as he gave the valet a tip and sat in the car. Aarti decided to go with her instinct and let him drop her home. It was a full moon night. The radio played the latest romantic numbers from Bollywood. They both hummed along. Dhruv was an excellent singer. She turned her head and looked at him through the shadows that fell while he drove. How can he be sexy in whatever he did? I didn't know you liked Bollywood music. She teased him with a sly smile. Started only recently, he replied. He smiled back as he stared at her eminently gorgeous face. They'd always had such great chemistry, an easy, natural camaraderie that had obviously never gone away. Maybe some people truly lived in each other. Maybe distance, space, and time never allowed them to meet, but when they did, it was as if a part of them was awakened. That's what Dhruv felt like for Aarti. Wherever he would go and whatever he would do, she would remain with him, and he with her. They didn't need to meet, or marry, or talk. They were passing friends in the train of life, who shared a compartment every now and then because luck allowed them. They got to her apartment building, and as usual, all the guards were asleep. She told him to turn off his car lights and proceed to the basement. He looked at her with curiosity. She wanted just a few more moments with him before real life took over once again. "Please," she whispered, holding his arm. "No one comes to the basement, and not all the lights work." He looked at her strangely. "How do you know this?" Aarti took out a pack of Marlboro lights from her purse and said, "I go there to have a smoke occasionally." Dhruv's eyes widened. "Relax," she said. "I'm not having any." "I didn't know you were such a bad girl," he said with a naughty grin. "You have no idea." He drove down to the basement without anyone noticing and parked in a spot where there was no light. No one could see that there was someone in the car, even if they walked past. Once he shut off the engine, he unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face her. Jauntily, he cocked his head to one side and challenged Aarti with a look of faint amusement. "Prove it." Aarti lifted her hips, slid her green lace thong down her hips, down her legs, and over the high heels. Then she parted her legs ever so briefly to flash him before she crossed it and faced him, throwing her arm around his seat languorously. She stared directly into his eyes. "I'm badass." She looked at him for approval and saw his erection. Aarti leaned in close and brushed her lips against the corners of his mouth. He kissed her back with a fervent ardor, and Aarti moaned at the touch of a man, something she had not had for so long. Her hands flattened against his chest and she leaned in further, brushing her hardened nipples across his torso. He broke the kiss to pull the car seat back and moved in closer to her before resuming. He stopped very briefly and asked, "Are you sure?" Was Aarti sure? She didn't know. She had played too many games in her life, with too many men. She had led with her heart and not her brain. In all these years, she still wasn't sure. All she knew was that she had longed for this. She needed it desperately. Her body ached for a man's touch, and she had been faithful to an impotent man for so long that her brain didn't react if she was sure. She simply nodded. He leaned her car seat back and parted her legs with his hand. He reached in slowly, gently to find the soft, warm spot within her. He used just his 2 fingers and thumb to caress her, moving in gentle circular motions that drew her to the edge of ecstasy. Aarti threw her head back and groaned in pleasure. He stoked a gentle, growing fire. He used the small confines of space deftly to give her maximum pleasure. She unzipped his pants and found the length of his arousal. She was well aware of the strength and warmth of his flesh. A sense of urgency drove her. She bent down to kiss him. She moved her mouth over the tip of his arousal. Slower at first, and then faster, harder. Hearing Dhruv moan encouraged Aarti, and she continued to lick him, twirling her tongue around his tip, teasing him with her lips. Dhruv's breath began to get faster, and Aarti knew she had still not lost her touch. She savored the feeling of satisfaction she left him. She stopped and turned, breathing in unison, ready for more. She turned and climbed on top of him. He kissed her passionately on her neck, leaving small marks on her shoulder. Aarti ran her fingers through his hair as she licked and teased his ear, finding his erogenous spots easily. He eased her off her dress halfway to expose her nipples, raw and hard, waiting to be captured in his mouth. Her heart fluttered. The warmth of his arms around her made her relax, sinking into the contours of his body. His tongue devoured her breasts as she let out a soft groan. Aarti's back arched as his hand cupped and squeezed her breasts. She braced her hands on the roof of the car as he continued to tease her, their hips rocking in slow motion. His hands gripped her ass and brought her down on his hardness as he kissed her with the strength of a man unleashed from the confines of decorum. They moved together, their bodies throbbing against each other, desperate for the moment to last. Heat rippled under her skin as she recognized the flush of sexual desire she hadn't felt for 7 years. She had killed that urge. She had slain the hope of ever having a man again. She had buried any hope of having a man inside her. And here she was, wrapped around a man who needed her as much as she needed him. She yielded to the searing obsession which had brewed for so long. She surrendered completely to his masterful seduction. Unlike last time, Aarti was careful. She knew it was the safe time of her month, and they could continue without any fear. As he finally climaxed, she felt a wave of ecstasy wash over her, and a deep sense of peace. They sat, panting, waiting for their breaths to normalize as they straightened up their clothes. Aarti had never had such an experience before. An itch that was clawed out through a restricted space and lack of time. She couldn't believe herself. She had loved every minute of this, but there was something wrong. She couldn't do it again and again. It was cheating. She was not a cheater. She was a good wife. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Dhruv. She kissed him gently on his lips and opened the car door. Goodbye. She knew that would be the last time she would see him again. It was a promise she made to herself. She also knew that she would need to tell Amitabh the truth, and she had no idea how it would affect him. The thought left Aarti extremely troubled. But telling Amitabh would be the least of her troubles. What Aarti didn't know was that someone was filming their tryst. A trouble monger who was out for it.